Because what you, the unsung heroes in the wastewater industry, do matters. Join me, Suzan Chin-Taylor, the DooDoo Diva, a longtime veteran of the wastewater, trenchless, and civil infrastructure industry each week as I deliver industry know-how from industry pros who know how. Whether you want to learn about the latest trends in technology, training and retaining great talent, sales and marketing, leadership and growth, or simply how to be more efficient, productive, or profitable, this podcast is for you. Let's dive in. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the DooDoo Divas Smells Like Money podcast. Today, we are visiting with Dane Wagner, who is the Chief Product Officer of Symeta. Now, this company is a little off the grid, out of the typical wheelhouse of guests that we bring on. But Dane and I met through very unusual circumstances. He was a reference for a vendor that I was considering working with. And as we, finished up basically the reference information, I got to asking, so exactly what do you do? And I found the work to be absolutely fascinating. And I think you will too. And I just thought that there was some interesting things that he had to share about what the company does, principles, and, food for thought, whether you are a service provider, a manufacturer, or someone in the, public space, such as a wastewater treatment plant operator, collection systems, whatever may be. And so without, spoiler alert here, I'll let Dane explain what he does. And so welcome to the show, Dane.
Hi, thanks for having me on here. So I guess let's start with what Symeta does, right? Symeta
Yes.
is a company that focuses on quantifying human capital and increasing efficiency and productivity and all aspects of ensuring that you're meeting your goals in a company. We do that a couple different ways, right? It's a lot. It's a big order that we're asking there. But for the most part, it's all focused on getting tools, getting advice, and building out the knowledge around ensuring you're meeting those metrics.
Great. So, when we were talking, soft skills are becoming more and more important in an organization, and productivity to reduce, turnover, because I think I discussed this with you. I mean, we're facing, an epidemic of shortage of labor. And, silver tsunami, retiring out, people are leaving the industry, nobody's coming in. And then how do we, until we figure out the way to recruit new blood, younger people in, we have to make the most of the human resources, that asset, those human assets for what we have left in a very timely way and in a way that is not going to burn those people out. Because very often they're being tasked, as people are leaving, they're being tasked to do more and more with less help. And so when I saw your tagline and we began looking at that, and it's prevent, predict, and propel, that I want to take that in order as to how that principle of, let's start with prevent, can be applied to organizations within our industry sector. And what are some of the things that they should be looking at when you were talking about effectiveness, productivity, which obviously that affects the bottom line of profitability.
Sure.
Okay. So how do we start, and what are some of the key things that they should be looking at in their organization to address those issues, whether they have a pain point or not? At some point, they are going to have a pain point.
That's exactly right. And that's one of the things that we focus on with that prevent, right? It's identifying that even if you're not spotting a pain point right now, you're probably going to identify one tomorrow or the next day or the next day. And so prevent is really about seeing, okay, how can we make today strong enough to withstand tomorrow? Because in this world where, as you mentioned, one of the things that we're fighting strongly against is attrition, right? People are leaving companies. They're going to start either new companies, they're going and getting recruited by other companies, or they're just ending their careers and finding a way to whittle out and sort of taper out their expectations and workflow so that they can start a new stage of life. And with this means that tomorrow, the people that you have at your disposal aren't going to be the same that you have today. You may have less. In a good world, you might have more. But regardless of what that number is tomorrow, you should be prepared today. And part of that is looking at things such as um, intercommunicative conflict. So if you're ever at a meeting, perhaps some of us have experienced this before, where somebody brings up an idea and nobody's really giving it the credit that it needs to have, right? People are not listening. They're not really letting it be heard. And that, of course, has repercussions for the individual that's presenting that idea. Sometimes this manifests as, some passive aggressive conflict, but sometimes others will manifest this as an outright conflict where you can see and hear and feel that tension building. Sometimes it's shouting in the boardroom, sometimes it's shouting even on Zoom, like we're speaking right now. And so we have to look at things like that. We have to look at things such as decision paralysis, which exists where, you have so many options. How do you choose the right thing to go forward? Each have benefits, each have side effects. And of course, as a third part here, it's also the workload, right? It's the workload and workflow where we have to identify who's doing what. Do they need to really be doing that? And are there solutions that offset that workload slash workflow? Sometimes we're doing extra steps where we don't need those extra steps. Sometimes we're picking up the slack because we just lost somebody. Now I have to do my work and their work, right? So these are the areas where when you identify this and plan to have those issues going forward, we can start preventing, right? We can start preventing by making it a little bit more robust.
That makes a lot of sense because often, with those meetings, and then they call them the meeting after the meeting.
Yeah, exactly.
They begin to gripe to other people. It's those water cooler meetings or whatever. And then that starts almost like, I don't want to say the rumor or the gossip mill, but it's almost like one person is disgruntled. And so then they're going to get their buddy to come on the bandwagon and back them up. And then it becomes a toxic poisoning of the well, because that kind of dissatisfaction, whether you want it to or not, it can start to spread like wildfire when people feel they are not being heard.
Yes, exactly.
And I've seen this because I think I mentioned to you, I'm an everything workplace trainer. And when you do that, often, the problems in the organization are someone would have been okay with the idea not being implemented, but to at least have felt that they were at least heard and it was given consideration. Or someone says, that's good, but I see one little issue with it. What if we tweaked it just a little bit, took this, but then tweaked it that way? And next thing you know, they're like, well, at least I was the start of the conversation. They're appreciating and valuing what I have to contribute to the start of making a change that can benefit and other people weigh in. And I've just seen just subtle changes like that can really change the whole vibe in a workplace culture where I'm being heard. I am valued.
Mm-hmm. That's
At the end of the day, I think that's what we as human beings, we don't like to think about this, but I think one of the biggest, I would say, drains on any organization, and it affects the profitability or effectiveness, productivity too, is human insecurity.
Yes.
And we come to work with it every day, whether you're a manager or the guy that puts out the safety cones on the street, on the truck at the construction site. We all arrive at work with human insecurity. And we as owners or managers have to deal with that every day. And so you're absolutely right. Getting ahead of that before it becomes a problem and preventing it to become something that isn't productive. I like the term turning it into productive conflict instead of letting it fester as destructive conflict.
Exactly. That's one of those very key principles that we bring to the table and ensure that we have a moderator that whether we bring one in or we train somebody in the team to be that moderator, how to validate feelings, how to validate opinions while still letting it lead towards something actually beneficial. Because it's not enough to say, I hear you, right? That is part of it. But the next step needs to be, I hear you, let's build on that, right? Let's do something. It doesn't have to be, as you mentioned, right? It doesn't have to literally be the implementation of that idea as it is. But sometimes just saying, cool, you've started something here, right? That idea is a seed that is now going to flourish over time. You feel better about it. They feel better about it. And going forward, moving forward, we have this ability to now say, okay, I can say things, I can be heard, and it doesn't have to be the perfect idea. But as long as I'm contributing, as long as I'm giving something here,
there it
and
is.
they're seeing that I'm contributing, then we can work together on that.
Yeah, we're on the same page here.
Yeah.
So what do you mean about, so that's just one of the things to be taking a look at. What do you mean by predict? I thought that was a really, when we talked about this offline on the show, I thought that was the most fascinating of the three things that you bring to the table that people really need to look at, because they think, oh, there's no crystal ball. How could it possibly, predict what's going to happen tomorrow or next month or a year from now? What are you, the great Karnak, going, envelope on the head? I see Joe is going to leave, or Mary's going to be promoted, or whatever that's going to be. A hurricane is going to strike in 2 months.
Yep. And that's one of the aspects that we sometimes get that pushback for, right? When you see predict and you think, oh, so you're able to just tell the future, right? Yeah. It's like, well, not quite, but in a way, yes, right? And this is where being data savvy comes into play, right? We are a collection of people that have strong data backgrounds. So that's like what we live for. That's what we thrive in. And not everybody has that benefit of really understanding metrics as a whole, right? And being able to tie it together and seeing trends. Some of us are very astute at measuring some trends, right? Some of us are very effective at financial trends, for instance, et cetera. But when it comes to human beings, there's so many variables to take into account that it becomes very hard to predict. But we try, right? We try. And so what we really look at is traits of humans, right? So all of us have various traits that we come in, whether it's, the big five that we might be very familiar with: openness, the conscientiousness, things like that. But there's also some more narrow traits that exist in each of our lives, whether this is being a systems thinker or a strategic thinker, for instance, whether it's looking specifically and feeling with other people, such as empathy, right? And other areas that are just a little bit more focused on, okay, the day-to-day, what am I inclined to do? What am I inclined to feel towards? And so it's a mix. The prediction is a mix of taking that information, this trait information of the individuals, and knowing that if you're a systems thinker and I'm a strategic thinker, we might be saying the same thing, but in two vastly different ways, right? And now going in, as soon as I'm hired, you can know, okay, we need to address that now. We can predict that there may be conflict because they don't know how to communicate to each other yet, right? Staying on that communication train that we started off on here. That's a very key thing that can happen. But on top of that, we can look at preferences of how we want to be managed, how we want to work and have our workflow with these traits. And so they become very strong predictive indices of all those things that we mentioned before: conflict, attrition, uh, uh, the decision paralysis, right? These are things that you can predict just from traits alone, but specifically traits in a system, not in a vacuum.
So how do you pinpoint the traits? I mean, I'm hearing that
Mhm.
I would think one way would be, and I've gone through this myself, um, NLP, neuro linguistic
Sure.
NLP or programming testing.
Mhm.
I thought that I went to work many, many years ago in another lifetime, um, for a company, and they put every new hire through this, not so that they could figure out what their, how they ticked, but more to determine how they best received, absorbed, and learned information, so that
Right.
this enabled whoever was going to train them to train them and supply them with the information in the format that would have the greatest impact and could bring them up to speed faster.
Right.
I had never done this, and I found out that I was a visual kinesthetic and very low on the auditory scale. And
Mhm.
finding that out, that explains so much about why I had struggled so much as a student in college in the lecture hall. I did great in the lab, but as long as I could take notes, if I had a professor that never wrote anything on the board, that just
Mhm.
talked and I'm furiously scribbling, I always struggled in that class because I
Right.
needed to read it and I needed to do it with my hands. And I think that's an excellent way to test. And I myself, I love DISC because
Mhm.
it's, you were saying, the ways that we need to communicate with each other. I know on the scale, it's funny when I did this, I did it and then I made my husband do it. And at the end of it, I went, well, that explains a whole heck of a lot about why sometimes we just really cannot communicate with each other
Mhm.
on certain things. It's because of the way that he can absorb communication and the way that I blurt it out. I'm a high
Yep.
up, so I'm blah, 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 blah. He's a high D.
Mhm.
All right, he's a just the facts, ma'am. He gets overloaded, whereas I get verbose. So if I need to get something across to him, I need to know, okay, I need to go talk this out with somebody else, get it down to bullet points, and then present it to him. And I think
Yep.
this is the
Yep.
same way in our work life. If knowing how other people that we're interfacing with like to communicate or need to receive information, is that in certain circumstances, we may assume they're being very short with us and very terse, or they don't like us. And that could be so far from the truth. It could be just that we're overloading them and they just have to make you stop because it's eating their head, it's frying their head, not that they
Exactly.
appreciate you. And so yeah, I love what you were saying about predicting based on the traits. So didn't mean to cut you off, but yeah, how else do you use profiles, but what other things do you do in that predictive thing with traits? How do you see, yeah, you can get these profiles done, but as an organization, how do you use that? Getting back to, how do you use the data?
Right. Exactly. And so it's important, and I mentioned a little bit there that it's not in a vacuum. It's in a context, right? An
There
environment,
you go.
right? And so we have to gather data not just from the individual, but everybody in that system and all the attributes that are expected within that system. Say, what are the tasks? Where are the extent of those tasks? This is called a job analysis, is what we do. And you analyze the job, all the steps that are within it, what the expectations are going in. And essentially, the question is boils down to, what do you expect to do on the day to day? What do other people expect you to do to the day and day? And then what do you actually do during the day to day?
Oh, that's an interesting way of looking at it.
Hmm.
Would this also be utilized for determining if, you hire someone based on traits, you like their personality, their ethics,
Sure,
whatnot,
yeah.
and then you put them into a particular position and they're struggling? Is this something that can also be used to tap into skills that maybe you hired that person for personality attributes, but the tasks that you're being asking them to do, or they're being
Mhm.
tasked with, they just can't stand it. It's just not, it doesn't float their boat for whatever
Right.
reason.
Well, I'll raise you one even better there. So there's three kinds of measurements that we suggest should be done at the hiring stage. The
Okay.
first measurement is for personality, as we had mentioned and we've been talking about. The second is a skills assessment. So you should have an understanding of what skills they should have going forward to fulfill this job. Sometimes you make a hire that's like a flex hire, right? Somebody that you're not really sure where they're going to go, but they're going to fill a gap somewhere. And that becomes a little more difficult. But if I say have somebody who needs to be on the distribution floor, or, I have a very specific area that I need them to perform, I should have an understanding of what that day to day is like for somebody in that position and have essentially a KSAO list, a knowledge, skills, abilities, and others list. The others are these extra things that maybe we can't really put our finger on that are very specific. They're more just vague ideas. And these are things that we should be able to test for to some degree to understand that they're ready to go in there. But, well, before I answer that other question, the third aspect that we suggest is the interpersonal measurement, right? So, yes, you can test very, personable, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to put that out into the world, which is kind of boils down to that final point that I want to make here, which is that I could have all the skills to do this job. I could be an expert. I mean, I'll give you a great example, actually. I am very proficient at coding, right? I know 3 different languages and I can be a full stacks engineer with the knowledge that I have. It is the last thing I want to do, though. It is not fun to me. I don't like that kind of life. It's not exciting. I have that knowledge, I have that ability, I have the proficiency. I do not have the desire for it.
That's what I was getting at, the desire.
Mhm. Yes. And so it's the mix of all 3 of these things that allow you to make that effective hiring prediction, which is that, okay, they have all the attributes that fit into the culture. They have all the attributes that make them effective at the job. Interpersonal allows you, and this is typically found through the interview stage, do they really want to do this? What's actually motivating them, right? Because motivation is a huge part of performance. You're not going to perform well if you don't want to perform well. This is something that we've seen with students. This is something that we see in the workforce, and this is something that we see in just everyday life. You don't do what you don't want to do.
Or they say that, they're coming in and they're taking the job because they, like you were saying, they have the
Mhm.
skills. And dear Lord, I have a mortgage, I have another baby on the way. I need this job.
Right.
But they're doing it, but not for what drives them in their heart, their bliss.
Mhm.
They're doing it for a paycheck.
Right.
And that can be deadly because they're just going to stay as long as they have to pay the bills
Spot on.
until the thing that they really want to do at the money they need becomes available.
Yes, exactly. And that's what's called an external motivator conflict, right? We have this issue where if you're driven externally to do something, and this is just a fancy way of saying that if there's an object or something that you can't generate yourself that's driving you to do the thing, you're just going to go wherever that is. So
Mm.
if it's money that's driving you, you're just going to be there until the money is more somewhere else, right? If it's maybe commute, right? You're going to be there until somebody else can make a better commute for you. And all these other external factors, you're going to move to a better external factor, a better offering. But the way to build somebody who sustains themselves and wants to stay in that position is to build a culture that encourages the intrinsic motivator, the internal motivator. And that's where I wake up and I say, I want to do this because I want to do this. It's me that's getting fulfilled. It's seeing the effect that I'm having. Well, on that one, I'll give you an example here too, and then I'll shut up a little bit here. But I was working with Bayer Aspirin, Bayer, the creators of Bayer Aspirin, and they had some people in the R&D department that were lowering their performance year over year. So they were getting less proficient at things. Their productivity was dropping off. Areas were just not improving. They had a downward trend. And brought me in and they said, okay, so we need to do something about this engagement issue. How can we fix this, right? They're not enjoying their job. They're not performing in the way. Can we change the workload? I'm looking at it and going, no, they're happy with the workload. It's not the fact that they're doing too much. It's that and this only came from interviewing each and every one of those workers after giving them these assessments, after measuring the trends myself, right? We come in and you can't necessarily trust what's collected at a company level because you're not actively looking for the specific answers, right? You're looking for more higher level answers. So the data isn't quite as fine. But going in, we find that they're not seeing the impact. They're working for a company that does wonderful things for people. They know that they're changing lives by developing and researching these various technologies and various medications, but they're not seeing it in the everyday world. You go to the store and maybe 7, 8, 10 years later, you see the thing you worked on, maybe, right, in the store, but they're not seeing it today. So we created a user story intervention. And what this basically means is when people received the product that was being worked on, the most recent product, they would be asked, a select few anyway, would be asked to fill out a story about why they needed what they were using, what they were doing with what was being used, and what was the outcome of what they were using. And sure, this looks like just a standardized user experience interview. But when we break that down, what we're showing, and we were able to give the R&D specialists and engineers, was a real person telling them that they needed the work that was being done, a real person showing how they were using what was being researched and developed, and a real person that was showing that they were thankful because it changed their life. And so now they were seeing the impact. They were seeing an immediate impact, and they were motivated. And overnight, not even hyperbole there, literally overnight, after the very first user story was released to them, performance skyrocketed. And so it's about the internal motivation more so than the external. We can always say, oh, we want more pay. Oh, yeah, we want more time at home and with the loved ones. But even then, when we say we want more time at home and with the loved ones, it's not the time, it's the engagement with those individuals that are helping us grow internally. And so when your company or you as a company leader look to solve these problems, it has to be strategic and effective to reach the person internally, not just externally, not just superficially.
I love that. Well, let's wrap this up with last P for Symeta Propel. What does that mean for the company or your clients?
Sure. And I guess I kind of alluded to that just now, but it's about creating the intervention that's actually effective. It's about looking at the outcomes and saying, is this working or is this not? If it's not working, I shouldn't keep doing it, right? If it's not working, we should do something else. We got to change direction. And this is an area which companies will find themselves unfortunately stuck in, where they'll commit to something for an entire quarter, for instance, and they'll say, all right, we're going to do this, and then we'll check in at the end of the quarter. In reality, it should be a lot more often that we're checking in, that we're seeing this data and we're going, oh, this isn't having the effect we're looking for. And so Propel is about building that data awareness, data collection, and knowledge and preparation, that framework to do exactly that, to get the right solution as soon as possible and build on it, capitalize on it.
Right. Well, Dane, thank you so much for coming onto the show. This has been, it's been a really enlightening conversation of just ways that we need to look at the people part of our organizations, because without the people, let's face it, we're really, it doesn't exist without the people. And so if folks out there are interested in learning more about what your firm does, how can they get more information or reach out to you to open up a dialogue about possibilities?
Sure. So you can reach us at Symeta.science. That's Symeta, SYMETA.science. You can also reach us at our older research company, right? We started off as a research company, which is blackhawk.io. That's E at the end of Blackhawk. And you can reach out to me, of course, at Dane at Symeta.science. That's Dane, D-A-N-E, and Symeta, S-Y-M-E-T-A. I'd be happy to answer any questions that anybody has and start that dialogue.
Right. Great. Well, again, I thank you so much. And listeners, thank you for tuning in. Hope you got a lot out of this. I know I did. And until next time, keep it flowing.
Be sure to subscribe to the show so you'll never miss an episode. If you're an industry expert and would like to be considered as a guest on the show, click the Be a Podcast guest link below in the show notes for more information. Thanks again for joining me, the DooDoo Diva, on this week's episode of the Smells Like Money podcast.